Hi, I'm Dean Galbraith, and welcome to Forgotten Lives and Buried Stories, which is dedicated to telling the stories of people and events from our past that haven't always made it into the history books. In honor of Columbus Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day if you prefer, here are 10 things you may not know about Christopher Columbus. Fact number 1. Columbus felt the world would end in 1656. And he even wrote a book about it. In his Libro de las Profecias, or Book of Prophecies, Columbus wrote that when he crossed the ocean, he was fulfilling biblical prophecies about the end of the world. Not that it would end immediately, but in 160 years or so. Columbus based his prediction on the writings of St. Augustine, who said the world would end 7,000 years after it was created, because the Catholic Church back then thought the world was created little more than 5,300 years before Christ. That meant it would end in 1656, when Jesus Christ would descend from heaven and step foot on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem. But Jerusalem, at the time of Columbus, was solidly held by Muslims, and Columbus thought Jesus could not return as long as they were in control. Instead, he believed that for Jesus to return, Spanish Catholics had to take over Jerusalem. In his Book of Prophecies, he wrote that before Jesus returned, Jerusalem and Mount Zion needed to be rebuilt by Christian hands, specifically somebody coming from Spain. Columbus felt Ferdinand and Isabella would rule the Christian world from Jerusalem, and he felt he had been called by God to help get that done. Columbus thought his trip across the ocean would fund a final crusade to retake the Holy Lands. His journeys were part of his plan to rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and hand it over to the Catholic Church. For one thing, he thought that once he reached across the seas, he would find the lost mines of King Solomon, which he thought would give him enough gold to fund a crusade and rebuild the temple. It wasn't just gold that he wanted. He specifically wanted it from Solomon's mines, which had been used to build the first temple in Jerusalem, and which he believed should be used for the last temple. In addition, Columbus wanted to meet the Emperor of China and convert him to Christianity, with the hope that he would become an ally in this crusade. He believed that all the profits he generated from his journey should be used on this new crusade, and he predicted that in just 7 years, he would generate enough money to fund 5,000 horsemen and 50,000 troops to retake the Holy Lands. But when he first started sharing the idea of sailing to Asia, people laughed and ridiculed him, and for good reason. They laughed because they knew a lot more about the shape and size of the earth than he did. Over the past 200 years, a myth has grown up about Columbus, saying that he was ridiculed because the people of his time believed that the earth was flat and that ships would sail off the edge if they strayed too far.
I think the world isn't flat at all. I think it's round like a ball.
Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what he said? He said that the world is round. Oh,
He's crazy.
That is a myth spread by New York fiction writer Washington Irving, the same guy who wrote about the headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow. In 1828, he wrote a biography of Columbus, where he tried to turn Columbus into a folk hero persecuted by religious flat earth zealots. That story has been repeated in history books, artworks, movies, and even by academic scholars up to this day. But that story is just as fictional as the tale of the Headless Horseman. The fact is that every scholar of that time knew that the earth was round. By 200 BCE, Greek scientists had demonstrated that the earth was round and had a very precise idea of its circumference. Every major scholar of the Christian era agreed with that idea, including St. Augustine, Dante, Chaucer, Bede, Thomas Aquinas, and Roger Bacon. The problem was that Columbus was totally clueless about how big the Earth really was. The Greeks were very accurate about the size of the Earth. They estimated its circumference at just a couple dozen miles short of its actual length. But Columbus, relying on his own wildly off-base calculations, thought the world was 5,000 miles smaller than it actually was. He thought Asia covered 10 times more of the Earth's surface than it actually does, and that the oceans were much, much smaller. As a result, his map of the globe looked something like this, putting Japan and China less than 3,000 miles from Spain. When the scholars of his age laughed at him, they weren't afraid that he would fall off the edge of the world. They were afraid that he and his sailors would get to the middle of the ocean and starve to death without even reaching China. What nobody knew, of course, was that there were a couple of continents in between. That wasn't Columbus's craziest idea, however. When Columbus arrived in the Caribbean in the 1490s, he slowly decided that he had been wrong about how close China was. To explain his mistake, he developed another theory. He came to believe that the Earth was not shaped like a sphere. Instead, he decided it was shaped like a pear. To quote his own writings, the Earth is not as round as most scientists described, but is instead shaped like a pear, or like a round ball, upon part of which is a large prominence, like a woman's nipple. Borrowing an idea from Dante, Columbus believed that at the tip of the nipple was the biblical Garden of Eden, and that idea was confirmed for him on his third voyage when he decided he had actually discovered the Garden of Eden, or, as we call it today, Venezuela. In 1498, Columbus approached Lake Maracaibo near Venezuela's northern coastline. Because of various geographical figures, Maracaibo is the most naturally electrified place on Earth, with lightning striking as many as 280 times per hour, 10 hours per day, and up to 160 days per year. When Columbus saw that lightning, he decided it was the fiery sword of the angel Ariel, who God had posted at the Garden of Eden to make sure that Adam and Eve wouldn't return. And he decided that the garden itself was properly located atop the steep mountains that surrounded the lake, making it the top of the nipple on his map. His discovery of Eden confirmed to him that he was on the right path, and until his dying day, he continued to believe that China lay just beyond the western horizon of his latest discoveries. Despite such pious intentions, Columbus was crueler than most people realized. By now, most people have a vague awareness that Columbus has become controversial because of the atrocities that were committed by his soldiers and his successors, the conquistadors. But the fact is that after initially pledging to treat the natives humanely, he quickly turned violent, convinced that the lost mines of Solomon were somewhere in Haiti or the Dominican Republic. He ordered the natives to scour the land for gold, and told his soldiers to chop off the hands of people who failed to meet their daily quota. He personally enslaved 1,500 natives, and sent 500 back to Spain as gifts to the officials who backed his voyage. He enslaved native women, and gave them as gifts to his officers, who apparently felt free to rape them and turn them into their sex slaves. He also allowed native children as young as 9 or 10 to be sold as sex slaves. He used viciously trained war dogs to keep the natives in line. An observer said that the war dogs could tear apart 100 natives in just an hour. In his defense, some Columbus apologists say that he lived in a cruel age, and his actions reflect the cruelty of his time. But the fact is that there were other European explorers in the Americas at that time who did not treat the native nations so viciously. Sebastian Cabot and Giovanni de Verrazzano, who explored North America around the time Columbus was in the Caribbean, did not rape, enslave, or pillage the people who were already living here. Verrazano even dined with them and invited them to visit his ship. For more than a century, English, French, Dutch, and Basque settlers entered partnerships with the native nations on things like fur trapping, farming, fishing, and even whale hunting. Even though those relationships became corrupted and warfare and displacement ensued, at least they showed that there was an alternate way of forming relationships between the different cultures. And it's important to keep in mind that Columbus was criticized by some of his Spanish peers, such as Bartolomé de las Casas, who came to the Americas to serve under Columbus and was so appalled by what he saw that he later became a priest who devoted his life to trying to get the Spanish to deal with native nations less viciously. So that's a look at Columbus, his crazy ideas, and his misguided rule. I hope you like this video, and if you do, I hope you'll hit like and subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you soon.